Here's something nobody in a history museum will ever tell you. Every single empire that ever altered the course of human history, Egypt, Rome, Mesopotamia, Imperial China, every single one of them was built on a very specific, cold-blooded piece of bread geometry. Not metaphorically, literally. The exact shape of the crumb, the hydration math of the dough, the surface tension of the crust. These weren't culinary accidents. They were engineering decisions made thousands of years before the word engineering even existed. Today, we are going to dissect 10 foundational loaves. Each one structurally reprogrammed human society in a way nobody noticed at the time. And when you look at them together, a wild truth emerges. Bread was never just food. It was a tactical delivery system for water, a weapon against time, a political instrument, and the original blueprint for the global food security system you depend on today. So, toss out everything you think you know about baking. Let's start where the empire began. Picture this. You're standing in Egypt, 3000 BCE. It's dawn. You can hear the deafening, bone-chilling scrape of grinding stones before you see them. Two massive limestone slabs. Workers rotating a heavy wooden pestle in a grueling circle, trying to crush Emmer wheat. This grain was brutal, double-hulled, hostile to dehusk. Most modern wheat you eat today has been genetically domesticated over centuries to be soft and compliant. But Emmer fights back. So what did the Egyptians do with this stubborn grain? They weaponized its geometry. The resulting loaves were dense. Low gluten means almost zero vertical rise. But the inside? The inside was riddled with irregular, highly asymmetric, chaotic pores. Not the elegant, pillowy bubbles of a trendy Sunday brunch sourdough. These were cavernous, rough pockets scattered through a heavy, concrete-like matrix. And that chaotic texture wasn't a baking fail. It was the entire point. Because here is what those asymmetrical pores did. They acted as a structural sponge for liquids. When Egyptian laborers drank their daily ration of weak, watery barley beer, this bread soaked it up like a sponge. It became an all-in-one, calorie-dense package, food and drink fused together. A heavy, durable disk that refused to spoil or dry out under the punishing Egyptian sun. And that matters because those weird, ugly loaves became currency. The Great Pyramid at Giza, 10,000 workers, fueled by tens of thousands of these precise geometric disks every single day. The Egyptians measured, weighed, and standardized these portions to run an empire. It was the first mass production supply chain in human history. Bread was logistics before logistics had a name. Those ancient pores were water storage. The geometry of that flat disk literally engineered the ancient world. Not bad for something that looks like a deflated clay brick. Now, let's jump forward 3,000 years. Welcome to Pompeii, 79 CE. You're standing on a bustling corner outside a Roman bakery. Inside, a massive stone rotary mill is turning. And on the cooling racks, you see these striking, heavy wheels of bread. They are perfectly round, but right before they went into the oven, the baker used a blade to make 4 clean, crossing scores. The result? The loaf is divided into 8 perfectly equal radial segments. This is Panis Quadratus. Quadratus meaning squared. Not because the bread is a cube, but because of that rigid geometric grid. Here is the secret. Those cuts were a technological replacement for a knife. Think about it. Roman legions, marching sailors, and poor urban citizens didn't walk around carrying sophisticated cutlery. You couldn't just whip out a bread knife in the middle of a military campaign or a busy public square. So, the baker pre-engineered the solution. 8 segments. No tools required. You just snap it along the score lines, and boom, instant, mathematically precise portions. That geometry wasn't aesthetics, it was bureaucracy. This was the physical manifestation of the kura anoni, the famous Roman grain dole. The Roman Empire was handing out free bread to hundreds of thousands of citizens. To run a welfare state at that scale without riots, you need absolute standardization. Geometry was governance. Look closer at the charred loaves excavated from the volcanic ash of Pompeii. 81 perfect wheels preserved in time. You'll notice a deep, sharp indentations circling the outer edge like a belt. The bakers tied twine around the raw dough before baking it. Why? To maintain its structural integrity under extreme oven heat. It was heavy, dense, and hyper-efficient. It was a military ration disguised as a carbohydrate. All right, let's talk about the most romanticized bread on earth, the French baguette. Let me tell you a secret. Nothing about its shape is romantic. It's pure physics. A baguette is an elongated, one-dimensional cylinder. In engineering terms, it has a high aspect ratio, meaning its length completely dominates its width. You think it's shaped like that so it fits under a Parisian's arm? No, it's a masterpiece of thermodynamics. When you bake a loaf of bread, heat travels from the outside in. The absolute center of the dough is the last place to cook. The thicker the loaf, the longer that journey takes, meaning the outside crust dries out and burns before the inside is even done. But if you stretch that dough into a narrow, hyperextended cylinder, heat punches through to the dead center instantly. The crust barely has time to form before the core is perfectly baked. Because the French eliminated the thermodynamic bottleneck of heat travel, they could do something radical. They jacked the hydration way up. We're talking a high-water, incredibly sticky dough. And that high hydration created a legend inside the bread, an open honeycomb crumb. Massive, glossy, wildly unpredictable air pockets that give it that iconic chewy, cloud-like interior. Then come the grinds, those 5 or 7 diagonal slashes across the top, sliced with a razor at a precise 30-degree angle. Those cuts aren't there to look pretty. They are expansion joints. They tell the steam exactly where to escape, channeling the explosive oven spring to turn a wet, sloppy cylinder into a rigid, aerodynamic masterpiece with a shattering crust. And the catalyst for this geometric revolution? A 1920s labor law in Paris that banned bakers from working before 4 a.m. Since they couldn't start early, they needed a loaf that could bake in under 20 minutes so Parisians could have fresh breakfast. The baguette didn't come from a culinary epiphany. It was a geometric workaround to a labor regulation. Now, let's go to the absolute opposite extreme. German pumpernickel isn't a bread. It is, by all laws of modern physics, a brick. This loaf is made almost entirely from rye. And rye is a gluten nightmare. It has virtually no gas retention capability. No gluten means no elastic network. No network means the dough cannot trap carbon dioxide. It physically cannot rise. It stays as a dense, heavy, opaque mass. And instead of baking it hot and fast with steam, you do something completely counterintuitive. You place it in a sealed oven at low heat and steam bake it for 16 to 24 hours. When it comes out, the crumb is completely solid. Mahogany black. Zero visible pores. No air pockets. It is a dense, light-absorbing cuboid of pure carbohydrate. And here is why this was a stroke of absolute genius in medieval Germany. Bread without air pockets is bread that cannot breathe. Air is the enemy of shelf life. Pores hold moisture that breeds mold, and air pockets accelerate staling. By collapsing the geometry down to a solid, zero-porosity mass, German peasants created the ultimate survival tool. A single loaf of pumpernickel could sit on a dark shelf for months, through brutal winters, failed harvests, and marching armies, without spoiling. This was the MRE of the Middle Ages. It wasn't engineered for a flavor profile. It was engineered to defeat time itself. Every great food has a survival story. The bagel story involves a legal loophole, a geopolitical ban, and an accident of fluid dynamics. In 17th century Poland, Jewish bakers were legally prohibited from baking conventional bread. Why? Because mainstream Christian society viewed bread making as a sacred, religious act connected to communion. Jewish communities were barred from touching the standard town ovens. So, they engineered a loophole. They decided that if they couldn't bake bread normally, they would change the physical state of the cooking process entirely. Heads up, they boiled it first. By dropping the ring of dough into a vat of boiling water before it hit the oven, something fascinating happened to the starch on the surface. It gelatinized. It instantly locked into place, creating a thick, high-tension, glossy outer skin. That skin acts as a structural vault, trapping the moisture inside and giving the bagel its iconic jaw-working chew. And that famous hole in the center? It solves two major problems. First, logistics. You could string dozens of bagels onto long wooden dowels, allowing street vendors to transport and display them vertically without crushing the product. Second, thermodynamics. A ring of dough has vastly more surface area than a solid ball of dough. When you drop it into boiling water, the heat attacks the ring from the outside and the inside simultaneously. The hole literally cuts the cooking time in half, ensuring the interior cooks through perfectly without the outside turning into mush. Long before mathematicians formally mapped out the properties of a torus, the geometric term for a donut shape, Jewish bakers were using topological efficiency to bypass discriminatory laws and invent a global breakfast icon. Let's talk about baking in a gravitational field. A traditional clay tandoor oven is essentially a subterranean volcanic pit. It operates at a terrifying 400 degrees Celsius. To bake a naan, you don't place it safely on a flat baking sheet. You slap the raw dough directly onto the vertical, curved clay wall. It sticks there, suspended over an open flame. What happens next is a beautiful dance between extreme thermodynamics and gravity. As the intense ambient heat causes the dough to violently puff up with air, the Earth's gravity pulls the softening weight of the dough downward. The top of the naan, anchored tightly, stretches out and remains thick, pillowy, and full of moisture. The bottom half thins out from the downward stretch, and the very lowest edge, closest to the heat source, turns ultra-thin, crispy, and beautifully charred. The result is that classic, asymmetrical teardrop silhouette. This geometric asymmetry is purely functional. The thick, pillowy top is designed to hold moisture and tear easily. The thin, rigid base acts as a structural handle. This gravity-stretched geometry was so successful it traveled the entire Silk Road, adapting into dozens of regional variations. Because the ancient world realized that when you cook with gravity as a fluid variable, you get a multi-textured piece of culinary architecture you can never replicate on a flat baking sheet. Imagine developing a highly sophisticated national cuisine over thousands of years, but without ever using a single metal fork, spoon, or knife. How do you eat a rich, liquid-heavy stew without utensils? Simple. You turn your bread into the utensil. Meet the Ethiopian Injera. It's made from teff, an ancient grain so microscopically small that a single kernel is less than humanity's earliest counting systems could track. You ferment the teff flour with water for days until it becomes a bubbly, hyperacidic batter, and then you pour it thin onto a massive, circular clay griddle called a mitad. The moment that fermented batter hits the heat, thousands of carbon dioxide bubbles erupt and escape vertically, leaving behind a beautiful, lace-like fractal sponge structure. Those millions of micro-holes are not decorative. They are micropumps driven by capillary action. When you tear a piece of injera and scoop up a portion of rich, spicy what stew, the liquid doesn't slide off. It is instantly wicked upward, trapped inside the fractal geometry of the bread. The injera serves simultaneously as the plate, the tablecloth, and the fork. And the best part? By the end of the feast, the very bottom layer of the injera, the smooth side that touched the pan, is completely saturated with the concentrated juices of every dish served on top of it. It becomes a rich, heavy tapestry of flavor, the most prized bite of the entire meal. It's an incredible feat of ecological packaging, a completely zero-waste, edible utensil system designed entirely through the geometry of the crumb. San Francisco, 1849. The Gold Rush. Tens of thousands of fortune hunters are flooding into a lawless wilderness. There is no refrigeration, no stable agriculture, and no reliable food supply chain. If you can't preserve your calories, you die. The prospectors survived on sourdough, and the sourdough they bred in the microclimate of the Bay Area was a different beast altogether. It relied on a hyper-aggressive wild yeast and a unique local strain of lactobacillus. This long, slow, high-hydration fermentation produced a crumb structure that food scientists call chaotic open crumb with unpredictable void distribution. Translate that out of lab speak. It means the inside of a San Francisco sourdough looks like a beautiful, terrifying cavern. Massive, irregular, web-like pockets of air held together by high-tension, glossy strands of super-developed gluten. That chaotic geometry is a direct record of a structural battle. High hydration requires an incredibly strong, elastic gluten matrix to prevent the waterlogged dough from collapsing into a puddle. When that matrix expands under intense oven heat, it tears open violently, creating those dramatic, cavernous voids. But the real magic was chemical. The extreme acidity that created those bubbles acted as a natural preservative, creating a biological barrier against mold and hostile bacteria. That beautifully irregular, blistered, wild crumb wasn't designed for aesthetic Instagram posts. It was the industrial-strength armor required for a loaf of bread to survive the lawless California frontier. If you travel through Uzbekistan, you will see a bread that looks less like food and more like a beautifully carved propulsion disc from a sci-fi movie. This is the Central Asian naan, or lepyashka. It's shaped like a flying saucer. It features a deeply depressed, flat center that is stamped with intricate, geometric floral patterns using a heavy brass tool called a chekic. Surrounding that flat center is a high, puffy, aggressively inflated outer rim. Why this extreme shape? It is an ingenious engineering solution to a brutal climate. Central Asia is hyper-arid. It's a landscape of punishing deserts and dry winds. If you bake a flatbread with a uniform thickness, the dry desert air will evaporate the moisture evenly from all sides, turning your bread into a shattered piece of cardboard within hours. So, the bakers engineered a moisture gradient. By using the chekic to stamp the center flat and pierce the dough, they intentionally kill the fermentation in the middle. When it hits the tandoor, that center dehydrates instantly into a hard, rigid, cracker-like seal. But that rapid evaporation locks the remaining moisture into the thick, protected outer ring. The air pockets in the puffy rim remain plump, soft, and moist. A traveler on the Silk Road could ride for weeks through the desert with these discs strapped to their saddle. The hard center acted as a protective shell, keeping the outer rim fresh and edible. It's a self-packaging, climate-controlled food system made entirely out of flour. And now, we arrive at the end of the evolutionary line, where bread stops being an art form and becomes pure, unadulterated state infrastructure. In 1928, an American engineer named Otto Roeder invented the commercial continuous bread slicing machine. Shortly after, Wonder Bread hit the market. Within a decade, this single product fundamentally re-engineered the global food economy. Look at a loaf of industrial white bread. It is a flawless, cold, mathematical perfect cuboid. It is pre-sliced into identical parallel slabs. The interior crumb reveals a terrifyingly uniform, microscopic pore structure. There are no chaotic voids, no artisan variations, no unpredictable air cells. It is geometrically optimized for a hyper-efficient, frictionless supply chain. The perfect rectangle fits seamlessly into a rectangular plastic bag. That bag stacks flawlessly into a rectangular plastic crate. Those crates maximize every square millimeter of a rectangular delivery truck. Those trucks drop them onto rectangular supermarket shelves. This bread was not engineered for the quality of human taste. It was engineered for the efficiency of velocity. It is the carbohydrate equivalent of Tetris. It tastes like almost nothing, and that is a deliberate features and benefits calculation. Bread with zero distinct flavor profile presents zero supply chain risk. It alienates no demographics. It works with everything, everywhere, for everyone. This is what food security looks like when you have to scale calories for 8 billion people. It's not about baking better bread. It's about creating an unstoppable, hyper-optimized, low-cost calorie delivery infrastructure. So, let's look back at the grand blueprint. Ancient Egypt solved labor logistics with asymmetric pores in an Emmer disk. Imperial Rome engineered portion control with pre-scored wheels. The French defeated a labor law using thermodynamic cylinders. Medieval Germany conquered winter famine with zero-porosity bricks. Polish bakers hacked legal bans using ring-shaped topology. Central Asia defeated desert droughts with a geometric moisture gradient. And modern America scaled global food security using a perfect industrial rectangle. None of these shapes were accidents. None of them were mere taste preferences. They were precise, calculated engineering responses to the eternal human problems of logistics, climate, power, and survival. The piece of bread you eat tomorrow morning has a more sophisticated pedigree than the phone in your pocket. Every single slice is an ancient solution to a human crisis, worked out through flour, water, and heat. So, next time you look at a loaf of bread, look at the geometry. Because you're not just looking at breakfast. You're looking at the architecture of civilization.